Welcome to another episode of the Level Up Your Gym podcast. My name is Joe Hashey, your host, and today it is my honor to be joined by Jeremy Strifler, who spent some time with me in college and tolerated me and survived and became a very successful adult. And Jeremy and I have stayed in touch on and off throughout the years as he's become a real estate professional. And just touching base, he's into fitness as well, and I thought he'd be the perfect person to have on. He actually offered to do it, which I really appreciate, to come on and share some tips for gym owners who are trying to get that first spot. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. Good to see you virtually.
Tell us a little bit about your background in real estate.
Sure. So after you and I graduated together, I went into commercial real estate and worked in retail. Specifically worked for a company that owned shopping malls and strip centers and urban retail in New York City. I then got my MBA, and then for the last 10 years since finishing my MBA, I've been working for a service provider, a company called Cushman & Wakefield that provides tenant rep, landlord rep, facilities management, project management, anything related to commercial real estate that you can imagine. So my job is to represent occupiers, helping people lease or buy space. And I've worked in both retail, office, and then special purpose properties like everything from churches to schools. So a real smorgasbord of commercial spaces.
You smart son of a gun. I didn't know you got your MBA. Where'd you go for that?
I went through St. John's University of New York, and that was a great program. And I went during the recession of 2008 to 2010, and I didn't know that was my timing. It ended up being great timing in retrospect. But I really wanted to get back into commercial real estate when I finished. I more so went into my MBA because I was an English major undergrad and thought it'd be good to learn how to do math and have that round out my skill set that way by taking more finance classes as well as marketing classes.
And so before we get into your 3 tips, since you've had so much experience in the field, what's one of the coolest properties you got to work on?
Oh, wow. So I really enjoyed working with a charter school in Minnesota called Metro Deaf. And so they serve kids who are deaf or hard of hearing, as well as some that are blind. And so we helped them sell their existing school and buy a new property, which was larger because their program was growing. And as part of that process of buying the new building, we also helped we had project management, so we took them through finding an architect, finding a contractor, and so along the way got to learn about all the design issues that you have to address when you're with that community where we might take for granted, especially the fact that they also, if you ring a buzzer, right, or a siren because there's a fire, that doesn't work. And so thinking about how can you use lights and other tactile things, even along the walls, they have almost like chair rails, so someone can feel the difference between, hallways. And so when you go into a classroom, so that was a really fun project to see from start to finish, and then even be able to attend the grand opening and see how much the kids were enjoying the new facility, which was much more than their previous one, designed to their needs.
Sounds like an amazing learning experience, and we're excited to get to your tips and suggestions today, because I was pre-recording an episode just this week where one of our inner circle members got to ask me questions, and their last question was on finding their first spot coming out of the garage that they were working in and trying to work through the struggles of leasing. And most gym owners don't have much of a background in this. So Jeremy, you have 3 tips prepared. What's the first one?
I do, yeah. So thanks. So the first kind of builds upon something you've talked about in the past on your podcast about knowing your client. You describe it as a way of writing out a description. What does that client look like? And so in terms of taking that to the next step, if you don't already have a facility, is where is that client or customer? Where are they living? Where are they working? Because it would be ill-advised, right, to put your gym across town if everyone that you're targeting, right, lives 10 miles away. Obviously, you want to be somewhat of a convenience for them. People are hopefully seeking you out, but at the same time, you're likely not going to be the only gym in town. And so, obviously, besides all the other great benefits that you offer, how do a differentiator is just going to be location. And so, thinking about where are those customers, right? If you're targeting more of like a youth program, where are you relative to the schools? If you're more for seniors, where are you next to where they're living? They're likely going to want to have a shorter commute. So just really thinking about who that client is. And when you think about national and regional brands, whether it be fitness chains or everyone from like a CVS to Target, they have very sophisticated programs where they're looking at demographics and psychographics, which for those unfamiliar, psychographics is really about personality. So it's not only what the population looks like, but then what do they think? And so, they're using that to identify target markets. And so without sophisticated software, even if you don't have access, I think there's enough indicators in a market that you live in to kind of use those to base off of identifying where your client might be.
I think that's a perfect one to start with because I've seen so many people go off track with this, whereas fitness studio owners, we think our programs going to attract people from really far away. And that's what just, kind of just hopeful thinking, because the reality is, and the studies show, you're looking at about 3 to 5 miles depending on population density. In a city, it's going to be a lot tighter, maybe even under 3 miles. You're going to attract most of your members. And if you're in a more rural population, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 6 miles. But if you think facility first and you go for a bigger space because we're all a little bit cheap, that's on the wrong side of town, you're going to have a tough time attracting people. I would rather have a less than ideal building in the ideal spot than the other way around. So I love that you started with that one.
Yeah, and I think one thing to build on that is knowing where they are. So then it's okay, hopefully you have a few options. And so kind of even taking that a little bit further. So it's not just that are you in the right part of town, but then are you in the right building? And if you think about and try to take notice, right, who's next to a grocery store? It's usually other service, convenience types services and retailers, right? The gas station's probably near the grocery store. The pharmacy is probably near the grocery store. Whereas if I go out to like more a home goods store, it's other shops that are simpatico, but also that you're less frequently going to. So thinking about if you have that kind of choice, who your neighbors are, like, will your neighbors benefit you? Is someone going to think about you if they see that you're next door to whatever other retail store, coffee shop, grocery, whatever that they're going to on a hopefully a frequent basis? Does it make sense for them to then go next door to your gym and vice versa? And so if you think about where Planet Fitness are and Gold's Gym, often then you find like the Vitamin Shop or GNC will be right next door, right? Because they get it. They're like, well, that's my customer, is the person going to the gym. And so kind of trying to reverse engineer that a little bit for yourself.
That's a great tip, to just have people that are listening drive around town and just take notice of what businesses are around other businesses, and primarily the chains that have the money and the investment to do the research and land in the ideal spots for them. And then you can scale back to what's practical for you. But that would be some good homework. Just drive around and see what's paired up in your area.
Yeah, and I do agree with you too about that point of willingness to travel, especially if they're first time clients, customers, right? And also if they're newer to training, group fitness, I think people are more likely to go farther once they're kind of well into the system. Someone who tires, I've gone to CrossFit gyms for the last 10 years. And so if you kind of, for whatever reason, get tired of that coach staff or something changes and you don't like it, you might be willing now to travel farther because you know what you're looking for. Whereas there is just going to be that level of convenience especially for a first timer, that they're going to focus in on more than uh, traveling across town because it's the right trainer or the right lifting program. They're likely not going to know that level of detail yet. They just need to get their feet wet.
For sure. And that has a lot to do with the times you even offer sessions. So if you're in an area where people are coming close by to you, they're kind of the newer clientele, like Jeremy's talking about, you can have earlier classes. We have a member in the group that has a spot right by where the train lets out, coming out of New York City into New Jersey. What's most important for them is that they need to recognize that and have a shower available, which you can't right now. And it's crippling them because they have a great location, but it's not convenient because people can't shower post or pre-work and they have to carry everything with them. So with lockers and showers closed, it screwed up their location. So there's a lot of things to take into account, but what you can do to set yourself up for success is be around your target market. There's really no easier way to do it than that.
Definitely.
What's number two?
Yeah. So number two, once you start looking at these options, I think people get wide-eyed and they think of, the perfect world of what that gym's going to look like. And if you step back for a sec and you try to relate it to more your own personal life as if someone's buying a house, right? You're likely not going to buy, nor would the bank even give you the money to buy the house that you can't afford. And so kind of tip number two is using a residential term, which is, consider the starter home. And I know that can be frustrating for gym owners that like they can't, it seems like such a short time horizon. And so they kind of get nervous. Oh, I got to move again. And how's it going to affect my business? But moving is a good problem to have. That means something's going right, that you've outgrown your space. What's going to be a big issue is taking on too large of a facility that you can't afford because it just, as you're building up membership, and this is probably, again, more skewed towards that first time gym owner, buy something that meets more your conservative projections on how many members you're going to get. And let's all hope you have the great problem of needing to move and get more space, rather than paying for unused square footage, because that's the thing about commercial real estate, right? They're charging you by the square foot. And yeah, you might have a lot more storage room than you need, but right, why are you paying for that extra space? And so being mindful of that, especially because in addition to rent, you're also paying the utilities based on that square footage and your share of taxes and building insurance. There's a lot of cost, and not to scare people, but it's just trying to be mindful of working within your budget and really letting that drive success. And hopefully, filling up that membership quickly so you can move, but also having resources for other things, equipment, marketing, other elements of your business plan that you need, rather than now I've just spent the whole kit and caboodle on a great, huge facility, but I can't even afford now to paint it or XYZ.
Yeah, if you're dealing with retail space and all the cams and everything that go along with, like we have one spot in a retail plaza, and the extra fees, our portion of taxes, the community access maintenance, whatever it stands for, are over double our rent. So it's significantly more, and you can shop around and figure this stuff out as you work through the process. But there is an in-between step that a lot of gym owners use because they're not 100% confident in their marketing, and that's fine. Neither was I. They're not 100% solid in their business plans at the beginning unless they're starting a franchise. That's why you'll see those more pop up, because they already have the business plan and the marketing in a retail plaza. But what a lot of people do while they get their feet under them and build a little bit of a membership is look to sublease from someone that already exists and has space. Now they have to be able to do it in their lease. Our first facility, we subleased from a baseball development facility. They had a back room that was 2,000 square feet they weren't using. I read in the newspaper that there was a trainer back there that expanded and moved somewhere else. So I called the owner. We subleased that for a fraction, and we weren't on a lease and we weren't locked in, and we got to make a lot of mistakes. It afforded us the ability to make a lot of mistakes early on while we built our company that I wouldn't have been able to make if I had a higher overhead. So I know some trainers who rent spaces from gyms and churches and do certain classes on the weekend. it's all a build up to what your vision is and what you can afford, but make sure you have some runway and don't paint yourself in the corner assuming it's going to be that ideal situation that Jeremy was just talking about.
Absolutely. And uh, a good example I have of this, and they're friends, and I attended their gym, but in Minneapolis was a boxing club that, as they're looking for space, rather than just sit on the couch and wait until they could find this perfect spot, they found a local lifting gym that had floor space, and they would go in there at 7 a.m. on Saturday mornings when a lot of the lifters hadn't woken up yet, and have an hour-long class. But it was allowing them to start to build goodwill with potential members by giving them even just a weekly session to come to, and then after 6 months, they were able to find a 1-year home. And again, that willingness to say, this doesn't need to be the forever home. Like we can build this as we go. And so, they found a basement space in a building that had showers, which was great, right? For that was a cost they didn't have to take on. So they just had to bring in flooring and their equipment. And then another year later, we found them a sublease space through a CrossFit gym that already had all the flooring, had bathrooms in the building. So again, they just had to bring in their equipment. Maybe someone else would say, forget it, I'll just pass until I can get exactly what I want. But instead, they said, let's just keep growing, and we'll get to that. When we get there, we'll get there. But, they didn't have the membership to justify buying their own building or renting a much larger facility. So kind of incremental steps as you grow the business. I think it's a conservative approach, but hopefully, if people who are listening to this are looking for this to be a career and not a short-term kind of hobby, which I imagine anyone who's listening, that is their vision, then be patient with it.
2 additions, because I agree 100% with what Jeremy's saying. The first addition is that you should never be thrilled by looking at just what a gym makes. You should be thrilled by what they get to keep. And real estate is a huge portion of that. So like I say, we're a 7-figure gym because we are, but if our expenses, I have worked with gyms that do like 1.3 million out of one space and their expenses are 1.2.5. Like that's not an ideal situation. I'd rather have a garage gym and our revenue be 300,000 and our expenses be 100,000. So keep that in mind. Don't get always obsessed with chasing the shiny object, especially up front. There's a lot more that goes into it, and it gives you the leeway to gain the experience to then be able to slide into a bigger space. And the second point they just mentioned is it's not your forever home. You always want to do, when you're purchasing your equipment, make sure it's mobile. All of our equipment, including our flooring, is stuff that we can, even in the building that we own, it's all flooring that we can
that's a great
pick
point.
up and move. So, we're putting $4,000 into rubber flooring and a little bit more than that in a roughly 4,000 square foot building. You don't want to glue it down. You don't want to glue it down if you have to, and you want to be able to pick up and move your stuff. Yeah, you bolt it to the ground. Everything that I put in, the 30K or whatever the equipment you get to leave with. That's not always the case for every industry, but you have the option to do that. So just keep that in mind as you're trying to do the build out, and you're thinking about adding fancy features. Lean towards at the beginning stuff that you can take with you as you expand, so you're not leaving a lot of money behind.
Absolutely.
Number 3, what do you have?
Yeah, so this will sound like a total shameless plug, but
oh yeah,
I really do recommend people consider working with an expert, and specifically a commercial realtor compared to a residential. And nothing against all those who do residential, but that's their focus, is helping people.
They're not listening to this podcast.
Good.
I'm just kidding.
But I mean, they're buying and selling houses, right? Yeah. Their world is not commercial spaces, and so I think just from just being practical, it's like, why am I trying to have my friend who sells houses think that that's going to be analogous to helping lease a commercial space, especially if you're dealing with a sophisticated landlord. And similar to why people hopefully are coming to your gym, right? You're the expert, you're the trainer. you're giving them value that they can't find on their own by just looking up things on YouTube or Googling, how do I rent a commercial space? And so, right, same thing here in renting your gym. Why not engage an expert? And I think where there might be some misnomer is that it's going to cost you. But the fact is, in most markets, the landlord pays the fee to the commercial agent, not the tenant, because it's an enticement for agents to bring tenants to them. And so just traditionally, it doesn't cost you anything. And the, I guess, intangible benefits are that frees you up to focus on actually running your business, but also um, brings in that sophistication, especially when it comes to negotiating the lease, that I think you'll be well served. Certainly, a lawyer will help when reading the lease, but even before you get to the lease document itself, like what are the business terms? And people too often think, well, it's just a rent. What's the rent? And that's it. That's the terms of the lease. And it's like, no, there's so many other elements that are business, even if they don't even have a number or a dollar related to them, in terms of flexibility. Do you have a right to renew when the lease expires? Do you have the right to terminate? Do you have the right to expand or contract? And then also, how are operating costs, especially when you get to like a multi-tenant retail center, those CAM costs, well, how are they decided each year? And do you have the chance to audit them and make sure that the landlord's not overcharging you? So there's all these details that I think quickly will overwhelm. And I would hate to be in the position where I get to the lease and now I'm kind of locked in and to something that I didn't fully understand, that and maybe hypothetical never even happens, and that's great. It's never an issue, but I'd rather be protected for those what ifs. And so thinking about using an expert, I think will go a long way in terms of being successful in not only finding that space, but what that lease looks like. So it benefits you and not just the landlord.
Here's the big summary on that. It's not going to cost you anything, and they'll know a lot more than you. Like, that is so important.
Thank you.
That is, and I don't think everyone gets that because they assume it'll cost them something. And landlords almost assume that you're going to come in with an agent, so they already have that in their estimated price, their starting point. Now, if you come in by yourself, maybe you can negotiate some things, but you're not going to know enough the first time. You're not going to have the right connections to find all the spots. There's a lot of benefits that go with working with someone, including it doesn't cost you anything. In every market that I've seen, it hasn't cost us anything. And I can give you two examples of where it really benefited us. One of our leases, we got a 3-year lease, and they're like, well, why don't you get an option to renew, like Jeremy just mentioned. So we got a 3-year lease with three-year options at 3% increase on each. So we can stay up to 12 years, and I already know all the terms, and I don't have to renegotiate every 3 years. I know exactly what could happen at the end of 3 years, which is my 3% increase, and I can choose to stay. So it's already pre-negotiated for over a decade for us at that facility, and it was so important to do. And the facility we purchased, the real estate agent did a great job with letting us know all the local ordinances, what economic opportunities were available, where in that area I didn't even know about it. The local chamber IDA had, for new building purchases, a no sales tax for 6 months agreement. So he was able to explain that, and which no sales tax on the flooring and all the build out. We put probably $250,000 into that building, essentially sales tax free, because the real estate agent knew about the local ordinances, were able to tell us how to get the application, and we pushed it through, and it saved us, through all the contractors, everything, about $30,000 that we wouldn't have saved based on my own knowledge. So highly recommend using a wonderful free resource.
Agree. And one of the even things that people might not realize is, especially if you're getting raw space and not a second generation gym space,
Mm-hmm.
there is in the lease a lot of value that, right, the expert and an attorney, right, can help in negotiating. Well, what is the landlord's responsibility in terms of building out that space, and then where does it flip over to you as the tenant? And making sure, like, if you want to have a bathroom or a shower, well, who's going to take on the cost if there's no plumbing, and roughing that in? Well, in a well-negotiated lease, hopefully the landlord's taking on that cost and eliminating a lot of your upfront out-of-pocket expense just to get your gym ready, And so there's all these little details that, and it's not to scare people. Again, it's just to be thoughtful about it. And so why not bring in that person to help go through those details?
Don't worry, I'll step in and scare them.
Okay.
Especially with using a professional. This is something we hadn't mentioned yet, is local and town ordinances. I have seen people rent buildings, gym owners rent buildings, assuming that they could run a gym there. And then it turns out that they are not allowed to park their commercial folks on the residential streets. So they were limited to 3 parking spots, and they were anticipating groups of 20. So they had to buy their way out of the lease, and it cost them about $20,000 between all the and all the lost time, which is going to be irreplaceable when it comes to growing their business, because they didn't know their local town ordinances. They went for the cheapest place. They didn't understand how parking works. They just assume park wherever. There are a lot of rules and things that we don't know about, and I would highly recommend getting the professional, and make sure you at least check those boxes before you rent a place that you can't use, and that happens with gyms.
Definitely.
All right. So I really appreciate your time today. I know you're from Cushman Wakefield. It's probably not many people from Austin. I think there might actually be one on the call. Is there any way that they can find out more about your company? Because I know it exists here, and I know it exists all around the nation. Is there a website that people can visit to check?
Just go to cushmanwakefield.com. And actually, there's some great resources about safety measures, especially in this COVID environment, about that I think are often geared towards office users, but I think would apply. Some checklists, that just great resources that the company has put out. But you can also then find where Cushman has locations. And I would encourage people to shop around. I mean, you have to be comfortable with who you're working with. Certainly be great if someone works with Cushman. And if you're in the Austin, Texas area, I'd be happy to be a resource. But similar with, if you're going to buy a house, you want to be comfortable who that agent is that you're working with. Shop around. No one's going to be offended. But so do your homework, though, too, by going through the website and kind of trying to learn about how they differentiate themselves, similar to what you would expect your clients and customers to have done to why they picked you.
Jeremy, thank you so much for your time and expertise today. I think everyone's got a good perspective on how to get started if they're looking to find their first place or expand, and some serious food for thought, and even a little homework to drive around and start being aware of what's going on in your area. Like if you see an AutoZone, there's probably another car dealership right next to it. They start popping up. You see a Burger King, there's probably, or McDonald's, is probably Burger King close by. Like they group themselves together for certain reasons. So I really thank you for your time today. And I want to thank all the listeners of the Level Up Your Gym podcast. You can get on our daily video series completely free at levelupyourgym.com, where I'll send you daily tips, 3 to 5 minutes to your inbox every morning.